I want to just pause for a moment and just ask you uh, to hear about your perspective on something I shared with you before the conversation, to see, one, if you'd read it, and two, what your reactions to it are. So my views on race have been influenced significantly by John McWhorter's work and others. And one of the other influences on me, and the namesake of our organization, is Ayn Rand. And part of what I get from Ayn Rand is the perspective on the positive view of individuals as unique and valuing them individually, not by any unchosen features and so on. And I was curious to see if she wrote on the issue of racism when it was cresting in the public awareness in 1963. I shared that with you. I was curious if you had any reactions to that, any thoughts, because my assumption was that there would be points of contact and maybe some common ground on her analysis of racism and yours. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually hadn't read that essay by Ayn Rand in 1963 until you sent it to me, and I was fascinated by it for two reasons. So first, let me just say I think her argument is spot on. Her argument being that racism, racism at the end of the day, it is a rejection of individualism because you are by definition judging an individual by the traits or the perceived traits of their group. Nobody chooses who they're born into. Nobody experiences being the average member of any group they belong to. You only ever experience being the person you in fact are. Does me no good that the average man is 5'9". I'm going to live my whole life 5'7". That's how that works with respect to every trait that we have. It doesn't matter what the average income of my race is. I have the exact income I have, and that's my reality. I have the exact intelligence I have, the character I have, and so forth. And so to prejudge me based on what you think are the average or typical traits of my race is a rejection of the individual. And Ayn Rand, as a staunch individualist, took that strong position against racism. And the first half of the essay, she's mostly talking about racism against blacks in particular. It was also interesting. The second half of the essay, she takes aim at the idea of affirmative action and quotas, or reverse racism, for the same exact reason, and makes the point that you really can't make the first half of the argument without also rejecting the forms of discrimination against whites, Asians, etc., or pro minority discrimination. So she's spot on in her argument. Two observations. One, it was very similar to Zora Neale Hurston's argument. Zora Neale Hurston is the beloved author of And Their Eyes Were Watching God. But in her memoir, she makes the point that both racial shame and racial pride just make no sense because if as a Jewish person you feel some pride because Einstein invented physics, well, you had nothing to do with that. The fact you happen to belong to the same tribe as this brilliant person should not make you feel pride. In fact, it smacks of a kind of substitute, a cheap substitute for the things you might actually want to have pride in, such as the achievements you've made as an individual. By the same token, to feel ashamed that certain members of your group behave badly makes no sense either because you've got no control over that. And so Ayn Rand makes the exact same point that Zora Neale Hurston makes. And then secondly, I found it interesting she was making the arguments against quotas and against affirmative action as early as 1963, because most of the writing on that subject, it's hard to find that many public intellectuals and writers opposing affirmative action that early, because it hadn't even really been implemented yet at the federal level until the Nixon administration, really. And so, in a way, she was sort of 5 to 10 years ahead of her time in making the argument against affirmative action, and I thought that spoke very highly of her.